Live now on Phantom Podcast Network.
I'm sitting here waiting, contemplating what's the best day. Watching that movie on the Lethal Mullet.
G'day, mate. How you going? This is the host, Adam O'Brien, of course, of Lethal Mullet Podcast. Come to you live from Quinlan's Cantina in the Gold Coast of Australia, here to celebrate 1980s, 90s and noughties action cinema. Tonight we've got an absolute cracker coming from the cult movie collection, the one, the only Black Eagle, starring Sho Kosugi and, of course, Jean Claude Van Damme. Sho Kosugi was at pretty much the height of his ninja boom, and Jean Claude Van Damme was just coming on the scene just before, of course, Bloodsport, Kickboxer, and of course Cyborg, that sort of run that he had there. So, before we get into the show tonight, here's how you can find this show and many others like it.
The number you have dialed has been changed. The new number is...
G'day, man, how you going? Follow the Lethal Mullet here on Phantom Podcast Network's master channel at fpnet.podbean.com or subscribe on the Podbean app, where you can find all the shows. Blood of Kings, a Highlander podcast. Culture Clash, a weekly look at pop culture. You look at Making Treks, a Star Trek fan podcast. You can also check out the Mullet Guild, a look at the Dune universe from me, the Lethal Mullet. You can also check out this show and all the others like What a Piece of Junk, a Star Wars podcast, Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast, Good Evening, an Alfred Hitchcock podcast, and much, much more. All on FPN. You can follow on Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and all podcatchers. Make sure you follow me, the Lethal Mullet, at The Lethal Mullet on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Now it's time for the latest action news from the cinema and martial arts movies and more, all here on the Lethal Mullet Podcast. Welcome to the show here, Lethal Mullet Podcast, and we come to you live from Phantom Podcast Network's Quinlan's Cantina. That's right, the studio here in Australia, mate. How you going? Now, tonight we're talking about a movie that was pretty much on all VHS rental walls. There was many copies. This is one that I rented out a number of times, and quite like, mainly because at the time it was branching two periods of martial arts action cinema. So we had Sho Kosugi, who started out obviously in late 70s, early 80s, and became pretty much the ninja sensation. Films like Enter the Ninja, Revenge of the Ninja, Ninja 3 The Domination, then of course the great 9 Deaths of the Ninja, and on to other films after that, Rage of Honor, things like that. Those films were quintessential classics for the early 80s, and obviously one of the big ones was Pray for Death. So if you haven't seen those, you need to, because it's quintessential 80s action cinema, and far better than your American ninjas and all that sort of stuff, because this is a martial artist that actually dabbled in that style. So he knew his shuriken, ninja to, or shinobi katana, and he also knew, of course, the hanbo, the bow, everything. And of course, a lot of the stars with the little flick blades in them too. These, basically it's a James Bond assassin style, ninja classic film, all those ones, right back to the Franco Nero film, Enter the Ninja from Canon Pictures. Those were quintessential for the time and still hold up to some degree. They were low budget. They weren't higher budget ones, but they were still fantastic. So Sho Kosugi was really pushing through and trying to get past the ninja image, I think, by this time, even though there's a little bit of that in here, more espionage style. Jean Claude Van Damme, obviously formerly known as Jean Claude Van Varenberg, was a martial artist at the time, coming from Brussels, who had obviously come into it as a karate champion at the time, done a lot of, obviously, karate in his home country, moved to the US and tried to break into the action market over there. And this is pretty much one of the first films, apart from No Retreat, No Surrender, and I think he'd done a couple of little short appearances in other canon films once before. He took off, of course, with Bloodsport, the film that he's most known for at the time, and of course, Kickboxer, Cyborg, and all those others. So the film itself is a very, very simple one. Ken Tani, played by Sho Kosugi, is a special ops operative who's basically trying to go on holiday with his kids. But he gets double-crossed by his boss cronies, and they basically say, right, now you've got to come here to Malta to do a job, or wherever it is. And to doing that, he actually takes his kids, played by Kane and Shane Kosugi, two martial artists that obviously are the kids of Sho Kosugi. And right now to this day, Kane and Shane are still in the martial arts world. Kane Kosugi in particular, you can still see doing work alongside Scott Adkins in Ninja 2 and other films as well. Very amazing martial artist in his own right. Studying not only Japanese styles, but things like Taekwondo and others as well. I think a little bit of mixed martial arts as well, as a lot of people are doing now. They're dabbling in a little bit of each style. Again, just as talented as his old man, if not more so. And basically, he goes under the government code name of Black Eagle. And they have to follow where a downed jet has basically dropped all this stuff into the ocean outside. But the bad guys are there as well. Part of that too is the KGB agents that are on the list, and part of those that are after it are Colonel Vladimir Klemenko. I hope I'm saying that right. Even just by my notes, I hope I'm doing that right. And of course, his right hand henchman, if you like, is of course Jean Claude Van Damme. Now, all of this is a big cat and mouse game through the city. Beautiful locations in this too. It really is quite well shot for what it, I suppose would have been a fairly small budget film. But coming out in '88, this is the time when, of course, Bond had started taking off again. We've also got obviously the time of it's a little bit interesting how it's sort of coming on the short tales of A View to a Kill finishing, and then we have a new Bond with Timothy Dalton. So big international espionage action movies, thrillers were obviously the rage right through to about the early to mid '90s. That was something that was just done. And in this one, it's interesting that we get it from a martial arts perspective too. So we have Ken, which is Sho Kosugi's character, meet a priest that is also an oceanographer style expert, and also former is a Vietnam veteran and also special ops operative from the old days, who gets basically recalled back into action while he's still trying to get away from the bad element of the CIA. And there's quite a bit of that going back and forth of just how much he's going to help Ken do what he needs to do so he can get away and take his kids on vacation. Simple as that. Then looking after him, we have Doran Clark, who plays Patricia Parker, the CIA agent who's an attaché to look after the children while they're going through the city and stuff like that too. And some of the great parts of this are just simply the little skirmishes that we're seeing Sho Kosugi have, whether it's at the banquet scenes or in this case running through the city and he's got people after him. And it's the sort of ninja style clandestine stuff that is more modern. I mean, why would a ninja, for example, run around the city in ninja stuff in the middle of the daytime? I mean, don't get me wrong, this is not a ninja movie, but I'm just sort of explaining the point of, you wouldn't just have somebody doing that. They would blend in with their surroundings. So, of course, they're going to be wearing just what you and I wear or whoever wears on the street. So it's interesting to see those sorts of points of the actual film itself. And, of course, we start to see skirmishes between the two, Jean Claude Van Damme and Sho Kosugi. Now, it's been reported that Jean Claude Van Damme himself has actually said he enjoyed the fight scenes with Kosugi because they're a little bit more real, a little bit more, obviously somebody that's got very, very experienced karate form himself, and somebody that's, not just a karate exponent. Kosugi, obviously, is one that, an expert karate sensei who went from Japan to the US, opened his own dojo, and also had the background, obviously, in ninjutsu, and I think judo as well, from what I remember. He's somebody that's obviously well-renowned for promoting a lot of those warrior arts, and Kosugi in particular is synonymous with the name of ninja. And, he has been, due to the films that he's done, obviously, but also just what he's done for that period. He was born Shoichi Kosugi in Japan, and obviously he's done, as I mentioned, judo, but here's what else he's done. Iaido, Kabuto, Aikido, Shindo Jinenru Karate Do, and Ninjutsu. So it's quite a few styles that this gentleman has done, and he was the old Japan karate champion over there too, and obviously he was coming to prominence, I think, in the 80s, also due to that TV show, The Master, with Lee Van Cleef, and that sort of grew his stardom. I think even past the ninja films he was doing for the Canon film series. But for somebody to be also, studying grappling arts like judo, sword drawing arts of Iaido, which takes immense concentration, and of course Aikido. These are the styles that sort of complement each other, but not to the degree that you would expect. To say it would take somebody that was incredibly gifted to be able to do that too.
Alrighty, mate. Time to go down to the pub for a pint, chat, action movies and more. Here on the Lethal Mullet podcast.
He left Japan at the age of 19 to study economics in LA, and obviously while he was over there, started to do different styles, from Shotokan, Shito-ryu, Taekwondo, and even Chinese Xingji Chuan as well. One of the great things about Sho is his, I think, not since the days of Sonny Chiba, we've got martial artists that's very direct with his moves. They're done in such a way that looks realistic on screen, but also looks good on screen. You remember back in the 70s where obviously Bruce Lee had to change and adapt his style for cinema. So he was doing things, obviously, cinema's a very wide screen. So Bruce wouldn't do a lot of kicks in his original proper style, Jeet Kune Do, It's a lot of it's his trap work, trapping the legs, bringing it forward, and then using obviously that energy to sort of attack, whether it's in Wing Chun style or even just in the Western boxing style that he was doing. And yet on screen that doesn't work so well because it's such a small look on screen. So he had to start using the side kick. And then I think, that's one of the interesting things about Bruce as a martial artist is that grew, that snapping side kick was so powerful. And that's how he started fighting, with side on. So it kept a lower profile, and also he's covering his ribs, his entire core. Something that a lot of karate styles and other styles don't do, because obviously your wrist stance is up here. Your abs are completely open to attack. So it's an interesting thing. That adaptation, though, again, is translating communication of what martial arts does on screen, so the power of it. And so that's what you saw him adapt a kick that he wouldn't use probably in reality, but he uses here. Kosugi is similar, but I think it's even more grounded than that. So what you're seeing is martial arts, in particular karate, that was done in a lot of these, the films attached to, obviously, the ninja work, stuff that's snappy, quick, fast, but visually effective. So you're getting to see what it actually came across. And it's a brilliant thing to watch on screen. So let's go through the cast. We've got, obviously, Sho Kosugi as Kentani, Jean Claude Van Damme playing Andre, the Russian bodyguard to the bad guy, Doreen Clark as Patricia Parker. She was an actress known for some work in the 1980s alongside Lorenzo Lamar on TV, and I think still might be doing a little bit of work. I can't remember. Bruce French plays Father Joseph Bedelia. So obviously he's the character that we have in this, who's basically helping Kosugi through the ways of getting the mission complete. He's the quartermaster, if you like, in this, the person helping him on the mission. We also have Vladimir Skomarovsky. There you go. I hope that's right. Playing Vladimir Klemenko, and he's quite good in this. From the opening scene, this is a Bond villain straight up. Played quite well, played straight, but it complements all the others around them. We have William Bassett as Dean Rickett, Kane Kosugi as Brian Tarney, Shane Kosugi as Denny Tarney, and Alfred Mahler as as Peter. Now, this is a film, I can understand why critics, for example, gave it a bit of a mixed reception. But what's great about this is it's a movie done on a budget that, to me, really extenuates the sort of espionage thriller of the time, the James Bond sort of atmosphere of it. But also, it had to bring in Sho Kosugi's iconography, which is basically ninjutsu. So towards the end of the film, we get to see him go on a last mission, if you like. In the mission where he starts camouflaging himself up in basically Greece, so this dark camouflage. And so it emulates some of the ninja stuff we've seen. Because one of the things that he's known for is the gadgets. So Sho Kosugi would be using not just ninja weaponry, but others. Films like Nine Deaths of the Ninja, for example, has all these cool weapons. You can follow Sho Kosugi's actual channel on YouTube, and some of those weapons are actually up for sale right now. But what's interesting about those is he's got basically the sword tonfa from one of those movies, which flicks back and it flicks down the side of your arm with the blade. So you can actually parry with it, then flick it back and use it as a full-length sword. Looks more like a Chinese ring sword than it does a ninjutsu sword, but again, an adaptable weapon. You know, the ninja would use whatever they needed to get it done. An interesting one too. But I think too, what about this film makes it quite interesting is that it's quite extensive for what it is. So obviously we have car chases, we have scenes with the family. Sho is actually really trying to sort of bring that element that he didn't quite have in the other films. We had a little bit of it in Revenge of the Ninja with the family. I think Kane was in that one as well. Pray for Death, we definitely had it in that one because obviously his family gets attacked to that, and that makes him break out the swords and the nunchucks and pretty much chase the bad guys. But in this one, it's a bit different. He's fighting for his country. You know, he's basically doing an espionage work for the CIA. So it really has that 80s CIA, KGB classic smash together. And it works. It works really well. But the big thing is, I mean, let's face it, folks, we're here because Jean Claude Van Damme and Sho Kosugi are in the same movie. And they deliver. So we're getting to see some of the trademarks in there from Van Damme. And there's obviously the big splits kick that he does. And it's done quite well. It's really, really interesting to see it filmed differently than what we saw in the movies that he's done since. Obviously, Kickboxer and Bloodsport were the first ones to really slow it down. So we got the beauty of those big scissoring kicks. In this, it's done at full speed, so it's not quite as effective. And obviously, I don't think he had obviously spoken up about what to do with that. So to a point where he'd done films like Bloodsport, filmed them. They were getting put together by other people, and even Van Damme realised, hey, look, I've got to do something with this, edit it in such a way that it's going to really sell the power of those kicks, sell the power of his Shotokan karate that he learned from Brussels. Now, on that too, Jean-Claude Van Damme's put out on his official channel an interesting thing. There's that he's gone back to Belgium, to Brussels, I think, where his original Shotokan karate teacher is actually going to be training him for his next film, which is apparently his last film. So I gather he's retiring from doing movies. Still in phenomenal shape, folks. Absolutely phenomenal shape. Talking about one of the guys that's from day one looked after himself, both from the side of flexibility, strength, cardio, you name it. Van Damme's the real McCoy. Obviously he's taken a bit of a beating from critics for his movies over the last probably 20 years or so, and probably some of them rightly so. But I mean, since JCVD came out in 2009, that was an interesting film that sort of changed the market for him a little bit, and you could definitely see that he was trying to put his heart back into it. And we've seen him in Australia a number of times, probably over the last 10 to 15 years now, coming back not only to work, but holiday and all that sort of stuff. But he's doing commercials on TV out here. He's even been doing some seminars out here, teaching not only karate as a whole, but also looking at fitness itself. So he's actually trying to promote fitness from all ages, all the way through. Working with some of the stunt community here in Queensland, in the Gold Coast itself, actually, not far from Movie World. So if you're in that region, he has frequented the area, done seminars recently as well. He knows the area because he shot Street Fighter here, folks. That's right, Street Fighter years and years ago, back in the mid-1990s. So again, interesting time. We're at a time where he's sort of starting to move on to different pastures. Who knows what he will do? He's still, I wouldn't call him old. He's definitely not old yet. But you got to think these entertainers that are in the action movie industry are putting their bodies on the line, and they really do. They go out of their way to make movies like this. And, you got to think about it, they're not just doing a fight for fight's sake, in the ring like the MMA guys do. These guys are doing multiple takes. So the first couple of takes are going to be great, but when you're starting to smash bone on bone, whether it's blocking and stuff like that, it's going to take wear and tear, and there are injuries. So these guys actually do put their lives on the line. or their bodies at least. So, immense respect for anyone in the action movie industry in particular. And to these two gentlemen who I think still to this day promote what good martial arts does for you as a person, spiritually and eternally, and of course physically. So, Black Eagle. All right. So, on the Hell and Back scale, what do we give this bad boy? This is a solid 3 out of 5, folks. Yes, it's not the big Academy Award-winning style film. It's not a James Bond movie. It's not even a super great action movie. What it is good with, and this is why it gets a 3 out of 5, is pitting two stars together that probably shouldn't be in the same film as their icons of their own, but bring them together, made a film that was very interesting, and it's shot in great locations, and even the co-stars, which I haven't really heard of before, are quite good in this. 3 out of 5, folks. There you go. All right. On the next episode of the show, folks, we're going to be looking at, obviously, Tom Selleck, Sean Connery, so stay tuned. It's going to be happening very, very soon here on the Lethal Mullet podcast with Kevin the Raider Nerd Reisel, Kyle Wagner, Lee Fillingsness, Blair, and Adam as well joining us, and we've got some big ones coming after that too. So,
G'day, folks. Hope you're enjoying the great shows here on the Phantom Podcast Network. Be sure to check out all the great shows that we have on offer and subscribe on the master feed at fpnet.podbean.com. You can check Blood of Kings, a Highlander podcast hosted by Kevin the Raider Nerd Reisel and Lee Fillingsness on their platform. You can also check out Culture Clash, which is the weekly look at pop culture hosted by Kevin and Kyle. Couch Potato Theatre. This is a cult classics and guilty pleasure podcast. Also Time Warp, a fandom flashback show. Endzone, a look at the NFL, American football. Also Good Evening, an Alfred Hitchcock podcast, looking at the great films of Alfred Hitchcock. Union Federation podcast, a Star Trek and Orville podcast, looking at Discovery and of course Picard, plus the Orville. But also the Hair Metal podcast, looking at the great shows put on by the amazing bands back in the late 80s, their discs, their LPs, everything, all covering the fashion as well. Hosted by Kevin the Raider Nerd Reitzel. You can also check out Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast, hosted by Kevin and Dan Hadley, looking at all the eras of Doctor Who. You can also catch out What a Piece of Junk, a Star Wars podcast, an amazing show looking at Star Wars, hosted by Derek and Scott. And of course, our newest one, the amazing, the Mullet Guild, an offshoot of the Lethal Mullet podcast looking at Frank Herbert's Dune universe. This is like an encyclopedia for Dune, where I take you through and down into the rabbit hole of Frank Herbert's amazing space opera, the sprawling universe which is going to be brought to life by Denis Villeneuve and December 18. You can check out all the shows there. Be sure to also go onto the social platforms on Twitter at FanPod Network. Let us know what you think of the shows and what else you can look at there. You can also check out great articles that we put up to there that we share. Also check out on Instagram and Facebook, Phantom Podcast Network. Be sure to make sure that every Tuesday you check out the great work done by Making Treks as well. A brand new podcast looking at a deep dive of Star Trek hosted by myself, James Semple, and of course the ever popular and amazing writer of Star Trek and Star Wars, Mark Newbold. Go and check it out, folks, and we'll catch you next time here on the Phantom Podcast Network's The Lethal Mullet Podcast. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. We like to continue to feed your ears by inviting you to listen to the Fandom Podcast Network and all of the other awesome shows we have to offer. It starts with our flagship show, Culture Clash, our weekly pop culture news podcast. Blood of Kings, our Highlander podcast. Couch Potato Theater, our podcast celebrating our favorite movies. Time Warp, the Fandom Flashback podcast discussing a year in movies and our favorite pop culture topics. Endzone, the NFL podcast. Good Evening, an Alfred Hitchcock podcast. Union Federation, our Star Trek and Orville podcast. Hair Metal, the 80s and early 90s rock metal podcast. Type 40, our Doctor Who podcast. Lethal Mullet, a 1980s and 90s action film podcast. What a Piece of Junk, a Star Wars podcast. And our newest show, Making Treks, a new Star Trek podcast with a deep dive into the final frontier with host Mark Newbold and Adam P. O'Brien. You can enjoy all of these great Fandom Podcast Network shows on our master feed at fpnet.podbean.com. Fandom Podcast Network is also on Apple Podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. You can also find us on Facebook under Fandom Podcast Network. You can also email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. You can also find us on Instagram and Twitter under Fandom Podcast Network. Thank you for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.